James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
What is up, folks?
Yo, yo, yo.
We are back with the Away Team Podcast. It's Cole and Dimitri here.
Yeah, what's up, guys? I'm sure some of you are in great moods and others in less great moods. That's the way the playoffs go.
Yep, not a great playoffs for people from the Midwest.
No, that's for sure.
OKC gone. Milwaukee's looking like they're going to be gone soon. I guess Indiana, too. Just all around pretty bad.
Yeah, it's been rough. It's been rough for those people. Luckily, up here in Toronto, things aren't looking so desperate. Very close to looking desperate, but, we'll get to that later.
So our last podcast, we did a little non-playoff related content, and now we are back to do a playoffs update. We're oddly midway through the second round for some teams, and then just beginning the second round for others. So what we're going to do is have the first half of the episode be about the playoff series, and then the second half of the episode be sort of a post-mortem for the teams that were eliminated in the first round.
No Titanic music this time, though. Sorry to disappoint.
Oh, that's too bad. I loved that. So let's just dive right in.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about the games that happened last night first. Game 3 of Milwaukee and Miami, and then Game 1 of LA versus Houston. So, yeah, we'll start with Milwaukee-Miami.
Yeah, pretty brutal. Milwaukee's down 0-3. It's not great. 538 does give them a 4% chance of making it to the conference finals, so, there's a chance.
Incredibly high, considering that no team has ever come back from an 0-3 deficit.
And if it were to happen, it would happen in the bubble. But it does not look good. The more you look at the numbers, the more you realize just how much of a stranglehold Miami has had on this whole series, even in a relatively close game, too.
Yeah, to me, the whole series so far has looked like a juxtaposition between a team that's very in control of itself, well coached, I like to use the word calculated to describe Miami, versus a team that looks very uncomfortable, not ready, despite having many veterans on the team in Milwaukee. And this can be seen just all over the court, but I think most importantly in their offense, right? Against the Bucks, only 13% of Miami's plays have been in transition, but when they do run in transition, they're incredibly efficient. In Game 2, they scored 169.2 points per 100 possessions on transition plays, which is insane.
Yeah, to be fair, the Bucks also scored 140 points per 100 possessions in that game, so it just seemed like the transition defense was just garbage. But Miami has just taken control, basically, and played the game exactly how they wanted it. So not only have they really kept the Bucks from running as many transition plays as they would like, but they've capitalized on that by just dominating in the half court, right?
Yeah.
And this has gotten worse and worse as the series has gone on. So in the first game, they had a half court offensive rating differential. So basically, their offense in the half court was this much more efficient than Milwaukee's. So it was plus 2.3 points per 100 possessions. Fairly close. That jumps up to plus 9.1 in Game 2, which is, you're starting to lose control of the ship here. Game 3, plus 18.9, which is insane.
Yeah, and it's, when you watch the games, it's just very clear, and like you said, has become clearer and clearer with each game, that Miami has the players to just give the ball to and score, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goran Dragic, Jimmy Butler, these guys have been creating their own offense. Obviously, the off-ball stuff is helpful too. It helps to have Duncan Robinson and Tyler Herro off-ball running off of back screens to free up either space for the isolation ball handlers in Dragic and Jimmy Butler, or just free up a shot for themselves, you know?
And
There's so many weapons.
Yeah, it's interesting because neither Hero nor Robinson has overall had like a particularly incredible series.
Yeah.
But the gravity that they're pulling and the way they're manipulating the Milwaukee half-court defense is so effective that it's giving Butler and Dragic in particular just incredible performances, like night in, night out. I mean, aside from game 2 for Jimmy Butler, let's not talk about that, which I will pick on this a little bit. Jimmy Butler was limited because Wes Matthews was slotted to him on game 2. And then in games 1 and 3, Budenholzer like barely played Wes Matthews. So it's just a really strange coaching decision. He had Giannis on Butler in last night's game, and then Butler scored like 17 points in the quarter by himself. And it's just like Matthews is one of your starters who has proven time and time again that he's probably the best defender on your team for the guy that's on fire on the other team. Why play him only 20 minutes in a do-or-die game?
Yeah, and the discrepancy in half-court scoring, I think, becomes even more of an issue when you get into crunch time.
Yeah.
Which we've really seen in this series. Every fourth quarter, it seems, has just been a huge slog for the Bucks and a display of pure efficiency by the Heat.
Yeah. And I think one thing is that the Heat are playing in a very comfortable position because I was looking at the pace numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Milwaukee's regular season pace was a scorching 105.
Yeah.
And Miami played at a much slower pace of 98, right? So you'd think that whichever team is closest to their natural pace is going to feel more comfortable in this series. And the pace has been basically from 95 to 97 the entire series. So slower than Miami even usually plays. But what's obvious is that Miami's like half-court sets are just so effective, and they don't mind holding onto the ball a little bit longer if it opens up a better shot.
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee just seems... I mean, did you see that Bledsoe pull-up 3 with like 20 seconds left on the shot clock? It's like they're forcing so many bad shots, and, you know, Giannis is being just stopped in transition very effectively, and they just don't have an answer.
Yeah, and, you know, things like the 20 seconds left on the shot clock pull-up 3, those shots can either be an indication of a guy who's uber confident or a guy who is really trying to find his confidence and forcing it. And in the case of Bledsoe, I think it's pretty obviously the latter. I'm not going to pick on Bledsoe specifically for this, although I think this issue was very glaring with him in Game 3. But one thing that you're seeing a lot of at the end of games in the Miami series is just horrible turnovers, a lack of concentration with the Bucks. I mean, Game 2, Giannis had that really stupid foul against Jimmy Butler to lose the game.
Did you know who was like smothering Jimmy Butler before Giannis stupidly came over and fouled him? Wes Matthews.
Yeah. The Wes Matthews rotation minutes have been just very perplexing the entire series. Even in Game 1, I mean, he was playing pretty well in the first half, and then Bud, like, didn't play him down the stretch. Beyond me. But, yeah, back to my point about the turnovers. Bledsoe's turnover last night at the end of the game. Huge. I mean, the game's probably out of reach there, but it's certainly out of reach after that turnover.
Yeah, and it was unforced. It just slipped out of his hands.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Jay Crowder even poked it away. It was completely just nerves getting to him. And you know what? Bledsoe's been in this position before. And I really don't know if he is going to be on the team next season after 2 really bad postseasons. 2 guys that should get credit, though, I think Middleton and Brook Lopez have been, especially Brook Lopez, have been doing a very good job of just keeping them in it. Lopez has looked absolutely dialed in on both ends, playing really efficiently. He's hitting a bunch of his threes, which is something that we kind of expected to not really carry over this season after he shot like worse than 30% through the regular season. So very, very impressive. Unfortunately, it just really isn't enough. And Middleton, even if he's playing efficiently on offense, he just can't carry the rest of the team like, you know, a real superstar could.
No, and just one last thing. Giannis can't take 4 threes a game.
He took 7 last night, and it was like, he went 0 of 7.
Every three-pointer that Giannis takes is a win for Miami, and that he's not going to be taking the efficient shot at the rim that he's surely going to make. he needs to not take a single another three.
Yeah, I mean, it was really bad. I know that Giannis had a bad game last night, so maybe playing him more minutes wouldn't have helped, but also Budenholzer playing him 35, 36 minutes in a do-or-die game is another perplexing rotation decision. And I think in a post-game interview, Budenholzer said something like, that's our ceiling, basically. That's really pushing it already.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, this is the postseason. Kyle Lowry, who's in his mid-30s, played basically all 48 minutes of that game. He got like 30 seconds of rest the other night. So I really don't understand where Budenholzer is coming from, and it really is a huge mark against him. And I do think that his job will be in jeopardy, for sure. I mean, if they get swept, he has to go.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I think the bigger question is, how is this going to affect Giannis's free agency? You know, this summer, well, I guess now it's this winter, he's going to have the option to sign his extension, right? Supermax extension. And if he decides not to, because of this series and because of the playoff woes, that'll be a big issue for Milwaukee, and they'll have to figure out how to trade him, you know?
Yeah, pretty much. You don't want to lose him for nothing.
Okay, let's move along, though. It's enough time on Milwaukee, Miami.
Yeah, we'll do Lakers, Rockets. So, good start for the Rockets in this series, winning by 15 points. Even before last night's game, 538 had them as 2-1 favorites to win the series, which I looked at it and I thought that seems pretty lopsided in the Rockets' favor after they struggled with OKC, who, you know, is not as good of a team as the Lakers, I think is fairly uncontroversial thing to say. And so I looked at it, and I do think that some of the assumptions that they made were questionable. They expected LeBron and AD to only play like 29 minutes a game because they both have like minor injuries, which, you know, they're not going to do that in the playoffs. Like, there's no way. And Rocco, Robert Covington, for those not in the know, has a defensive Raptor of +4, according to them, which is like a ridiculously high number. I mean, that's in the second best in the league territory, even though his actual Raptor, based on what he's actually produced this season, has not been that high. So I really don't know what has led them to value him so highly, but honestly, after last night's game, I think it might not be that crazy.
And just to clarify, Raptor is a player evaluation stat that 538 uses?
Yeah, it's like a box plus minus, basically. Just an all-in-one combination of different factors.
Yeah, I mean, we were watching the OKC-Houston series, and I think we were both conflicted because we both sort of wanted Chris Paul to exact revenge, but we're also, I think, honest about the fact that the Houston-Los Angeles matchup would be more entertaining and interesting, and I think Game 1 did not disappoint in that regard. It was very interesting from the perspective of, you think if there is a team that's big enough to punish the small ball system, it would be Los Angeles, right? Because they have Anthony Davis at the 4, and then they've got efficient rolling big men at the 5 in McGee and Dwight Howard, right? But what you saw is that the smaller defenders, especially Covington and PJ Tucker, were just able to prevent Davis and the rollmen from getting to their right spots. And even more than that, I think they were able to limit transition opportunities for them. Like, Los Angeles was 5th in transition frequency during the regular season and 2nd in points per 100 possessions. And when you watched them play during the regular season, a lot of that was Anthony Davis leaking out after, you know, JaVale or LeBron gets a defensive rebound, and he's one-on-one against a guy that's much shorter than him, right? And he's able to score very quickly. When you have the Rockets 5-out system, there's always going to be 2 or 3 players back immediately in transition, limiting those opportunities. And I just think after watching Game 1, it was obvious that those easy opportunities just weren't there for the Lakers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were talking about PJ Tucker. The matchup that he had against AD was a nightmare for Los Angeles. So they had 26 possessions where Tucker was guarding AD, and in that time, AD took 1 field goal attempt that he missed and had 2 turnovers and scored 0 points, so wasn't fouled or anything. But you talk about transition, which is a huge part of it, but that's not even mentioning that the offensive rating differential in the half court was like minus 24 against LA. So Houston was executing really well in preventing the transition opportunities, but they were also completely in control when things slowed down and went into the half court. And I mean, part of that is just really excellent execution from Houston. I think everyone was really on it. I think Harden had a particularly good game, but part of that does come down to, I think, these strategic decisions that they made.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes down to the brilliance of James Harden. I mean, he had a spectacular game. 36 points on 60% from the field and 50% from three. It's hard to beat Houston when James Harden is playing at that level. Mm-hmm. And I think the other big thing for Houston was Russell Westbrook actually played pretty well. The box score doesn't really justify exactly how well he played. You know, he was only 10 of 24 from the field. But what was glaring about Westbrook's game is that the team was playing better with him on the court. D'Antoni decided to keep him in at the end of the first quarter and rolling into the second quarter and have him play with the bench players and PJ Tucker. And they destroyed LA in those minutes. He was plus 15 for the game and was just clearly playing with an aggressiveness that I haven't seen from him in the bubble.
Yeah, I mean, coming back from that injury is probably a huge factor in that. The Rockets were often torching the Lakers. Like, I saw so many goaltends last night because no one could keep up with Harden and Westbrook. I mean, it was ridiculous. I think Robert Covington, he played the most minutes last night on the team. His plus-minus wasn't anything to speak of, but he was also such a useful piece for them. And he got, like 4 steals throughout the game. So I think that him and PJ Tucker, especially on the defensive end, are really going to be the most important pieces for Houston because they're really the only guys that can slow down the big men consistently. One thing that I thought was interesting was that, and troublesome for LA, is that they merely equaled Houston in rebounding, which should never happen, right? The team has no one taller than like 6'7" on it. And yet you have AD and JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, and somehow you're getting out-wrestled for rebounds? Like, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because Houston has a lot of really capable, I would say over-capable for their size rebounders. I mean, that's one of the great things about having Russell Westbrook on the team is he's your point guard and he got you 9 boards last night.
Yeah.
That's awesome, especially when you don't play center. I think ultimately a lot of this series is going to boil down to the role players. You saw that in the OKC-Houston series. Jeff Green and Robert Covington were scorching hot from 3. All of the role players really shot over, all of the important role players really, other than Gordon, shot over 35% from 3. That's huge. Last night looked promising in that regard. Tucker, Covington, and Gordon combined for 9 threes, and Gordon just had an amazing game overall, scoring 23 points on 7 for 14 from the field. Like, if Gordon, who I think at this point is probably their third best offensive player, Covington might be their third best overall player. But if he's going to get you around 15 to 20 a night, that's huge for the Rockets.
I mean, he needs to be because he was not looking that great in the first round series.
No.
Yeah.
Although he did have a good Game 7.
That's true. He helped them put it away. But yeah, I mean, it will come down to that. And you saw that with Kuzma having one of his worst games in recent memory.
Yep.
Rondo, I'm not going to say anything more. If you guys want to watch the game and just pay attention to Rondo, I mean, it's like a game-length Shaq and a Fool episode. I know the guy came back from like an injury and hasn't played since March, but geez, he was unplayable. It was unwatchable, honestly. I think that along with that, I think maybe before we move on, I did not like what I saw from LeBron. There was a lot of passivity in his game. There were some plays where he just got totally burned on defense and didn't even bother trying to look like he was recovering. There were a couple of loose balls that were going out of bounds that a younger LeBron would have ran over and thrown back in that he just let get away, and that's a possession you're sacrificing. And he only took 3 field goal attempts in the fourth quarter. Even if you think that the game is gone at that point, it's the playoffs, and there's no way that a 15-point game is still winnable at the beginning of the fourth.
Yeah, it was a very strange game to watch from the LeBron perspective. What surprised me is how uncomfortable he looked posting up Robert Covington. I know Covington's a great defender, but LeBron is maybe the best post-up small forward ever. He needs to be getting points through his post-ups, and he needs to be attacking those matchups aggressively, and you just didn't really see that in this game.
Yeah, very passive. I think he will turn it up in the next couple games. I mean, we saw kind of similar mentality of the entire team just giving up in game 1 against Portland when it was clear that it was over, but it's really just not a championship mentality.
Yeah.
Like, for how badly the Bucks played last night, at least they were still trying until the last second.
Yeah.
Even when it was already out of reach. And I just don't know what would be going on in the Lakers' minds to give up such an important game that early.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you'll see a really strong performance from LA in game 2, but I would be worried if I was a Lakers fan.
Thank God we're not. So on to Toronto-Boston. First off, just what a game-ending buzzer beater from Anunoby and a pass from Lowry, and imagine Nick Nurse had a big part of making that play come together. So really hats off to the Raptors for pulling that off. I really couldn't believe it when I saw it. I don't think anyone could. But it's really not enough to win a game by the skin of your teeth. They really need to get their jump shots going. They've had a horrible 3-point efficiency through 3 games. So, if there's going to be a regression to the mean, it needs to happen now. They've shot 28% from 3 in 3 games. And the only thing that saved them in game 3 was that the Celtics finally shot worse on 3-point attempts than the Raptors, but it was like barely, they both shot in the low 30s on them. So that's going to be a huge issue, especially when you have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kemba Walker, 2 of whom are having amazing games every night, one of whom has been kind of asleep at the wheel, but, they only need 2 of them to be going off.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the ball, while Boston has consistently gotten production from 2 of its 3 best players, Toronto has consistently gotten terrible games from 2 of their 3 best players, which are Siakam and Van Vliet. I mean, Siakam's shooting 36.2% from the field and 18% from 3. 18!
Jesus Christ.
It's terrible. And Van Vliet, who's supposed to be your sniper, is shooting 33% from the field and 27% from 3. That's just not going to cut it for your 2 leading scorers from the regular season.
No.
And it's just, look, there's a lot of reasons for it, but it's just got to change, Siakam is in the 8th percentile on points per shot attempt, which is awful.
That doesn't get much worse than that.
And the coaching in terms of Siakam's shot selection, I think, has been a little suspect. It seems like a major point that Nurse has been trying to hammer in is getting Siakam touches in the post. And for whatever reason, Jaylen Brown has just been eating Siakam alive down there. He's shooting only 39% against Brown. And it gets even worse when they put Marcus Smart on him. He's shooting 14% against Smart.
I was going to say, if Jaylen Brown's eating him alive, Marcus Smart is doing something that we can't say on this show. It's been ugly. I mean, you can just see it. Every time Siakam gets the ball in the post, the problem is he doesn't pass out of it, right? You can get him the ball in the post with 15 seconds on the shot clock. He has ample time to pass to someone on the perimeter and either reset the play or get something going. But he doesn't. He just goes into this tunnel vision, and it pretty much leads to a turnover, feels like half the time. Yeah,
I have wondered why they don't try to get him going on more isolation, drive attacks. Mm-hmm. Siakam's quite good at those moves, and I think getting him a touch more at the top of the key or even at the 3-point line and just isolating out with the rest of the team might be good. Obviously Brown and Smart are still going to be good defenders on those plays too, but maybe you can get, a reach-in foul on the drive. Maybe you can get some free throws that way. Clearly the post-up's just not working, and I'm not really sure what else they can do other than isolation plays.
Yeah, and I've heard people talk about using a few more pick and roll plays. And, Siakam's not an amazing pick and roll ball handler or roll man, really. But his percentages are, I think, acceptable enough on those plays that they shouldn't feel like they can't use that play at all. Like, it should just mix it up a little bit. It's way too easy to predict what he's going to do. Like, he's telegraphing everything he's going to do. But just on the topic of turnovers, like Siakam's been getting a lot of turnovers, but Boston has been turning over the ball a lot, which really speaks to Toronto's effectiveness on the defensive end, which I think has been pretty solid. The problem is they're just not converting on those turnovers. It's like Boston is able to get back fast enough to prevent them from getting much of a transition play going. And then once they get into the half-court set, they just stall it out, pass it to Siakam in the post, the ball's turned over again, and then that was a waste of a defensive play.
Yeah, it's just tough, it doesn't seem like the Raptors are getting what they want to get from their offensive sets.
Yeah, although I will say in Game 3, they kind of figured it out, and over 21% of their plays were in transition, which is exactly the number that they want, and they have totally snuffed out any semblance of a Boston transition game. I think Boston had like 6% of their plays in transition that game. So that's all moving in the right direction. It does seem like they're kind of figuring it out. I trust Nick Nurse. He's come back from this before, so I have hope for Game 4. But, it remains to be seen. If Boston continues to shoot like 40% on contested threes, who can beat that? I don't think there's a team in the league that can beat a team that's shooting like elite numbers on contested threes.
Yeah, I think if you're the Raptors, you're hoping that this latest win, especially the fashion in which it was achieved, is a motivational shift for the team and for the Celtics, right? Maybe it brings their ego down. You saw the post-game interviews with Jaylen Brown where he was extremely upset about having lost the game. I think he said something to the effect of, that shouldn't fucking happen.
Yeah.
So you're just hoping that there's a momentum shift because of Game 3.
Yeah, I agree. So should we just finish off the last of the semifinal series with the Nuggets versus the Clippers? So
yeah.
So far, it's not looking good. They will have another game tonight, so we'll see how that goes. But it was basically half a game of Denver trying what they can do, and then half a game of garbage time. Really rough. I think part of the issue for Denver is some of the defensive issues that were exposed by the Jazz have come back even harsher in this series. In particular, the lack of rim protection. I mean, the Clippers were just getting to the rim at will in the first half. And then I think when Denver tried to prevent that in the second half, they have really good shooters on the outside. And then they have guys like Kawhi Leonard and Lou Williams who are just great in the mid-range. So it's like you have to either hedge your bets and force more shots in the mid-range, even though you know that you're going up against two guys that they're just so efficient in the mid-range that even forcing them into those shots is not a good play. I just don't know what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't think the outside shooting was the issue at all in this game. I thought the issue was twofold. It was, A, they had nobody that could stop Kawhi Leonard. I mean, they tried Grant on him for the most minutes. He played about 5 minutes on Kawhi, and Kawhi shot 80% on him. Grant was minus 16 for the game, poor guy. And then they brought Torrey Craig in, the man whose name I can never remember, and he guarded Kawhi for 2 minutes, in which Kawhi shot 75%, and Craig was minus 21 in 22 minutes. That's just terrible.
These guys are your stoppers.
Yeah, and like, if you watch the game, Kawhi is just too strong for them. Yeah. You know, he's doing post-up moves, which, you know, they're probably not used to from a small forward or guard, But, I mean, these guys are, like, bouncing off of him like wrestlers bounce off of the rails on a ring, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's just insane. And Kawhi was creating space. He was getting to the rim. And when he got to the rim, there was no help. Jokic played one of the worst defensive games I've ever seen. I mean, the Nuggets gave up 66 points in the paint. It was just like, you're just not going to win a game when you're giving up that many points in the paint.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those points in the paint, too, were basically plays where Kawhi gestured like he was going to the rim and then just pulls up.
Yeah.
And just shoots from, the top part of the paint. And It's like, how do you defend that, right? Especially if you're a team that's already stretching your defenders so thin. I mean, I really think that the only hope that Denver has of even stealing a few games is Jokic needs to exploit the relative weakness of the Clippers' front court and just outscore them in those minutes. He's pretty good at scoring against kind of traditional big men, kind of like Zubats, would be a good target for him. As I said on the podcast before, he averaged almost a triple-double against Rudy Gobert this season.
Yeah.
So he's clearly capable of exploiting these matchups. It's kind of a matter of how long the Clippers are going to take to figure it out and come up with a game plan to stop him. And Murray also needs to get back on the juice that he was drinking in the first series, because it's not going to work unless he is playing out of his mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Murray, it's really discouraging that Pat Beverly looked so good in his first game back. I mean, Pat Beverly went 3 for 5 and was +8 in 12 minutes, and defensively looked amazing, especially against Murray. If Murray's not going to have, maybe not quite as good of a series as he did in the first round, but if he's not going to be a 5-point scorer per game, it's going to be very difficult for Denver to find the offensive game needed to win this game.
Yeah, and Michael Porter Jr. might be part of the answer, but how is that guy so bad at defense? It's insane.
You can't play Porter Jr. when you have two front court players as good as Paul George and Kawhi Leonard out there. Like, you can't just stash Porter Jr. on Patrick Beverly. Like, you need the size of your four to defend Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Like, it just doesn't work out if you don't have your four playing good defense against the Clippers.
Yeah, it's rough. I just don't see they either need to get on a historically good streaky run and just outscore the Clippers, or I don't know, make some adjustment, because it's not working right now. And I also just got to give a shout out to Reggie Jackson for the sick game he had. 13 minutes, 0 points, 0 assists, 0 rebounds, 0 blocks, 0 steals, and 2 fouls.
The old 5-0 line.
Yep.
5-0.
Hey, but he got those 2 fouls. You got to give him credit for that.
Yeah, Denver, Los Angeles, Denver's going to have to completely route their defense to get back into this game, and their offense has to play with extreme efficiency.
Yeah, really good execution is needed, and they just didn't show that in game one.
All right, break, and then we'll be back to talk about the losers.
Yep. All right, we'll see you then.
All right, we are back for the postmortem section of the podcast.
Yep, RIP to all these teams. We'll be going through, and I guess we're just going to be talking mostly about where they go from here.
And maybe things that we saw in the playoff series that should be addressed now that they're out of the playoffs. And we'll start with OKC, because I think they were probably the most interesting team in the playoffs to be eliminated. Maybe Utah. I think that's up for debate a little bit. Yeah, so obviously OKC got eliminated by Houston in what was one of the weirdest last few seconds of an elimination game ever.
Yeah, the refs really fucked that one up. Like, they took them 10 minutes to figure out how much time should be on the clock and whether to give Chris Paul the timeout that he signaled for 10 times. I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, and then somehow James Harden became Kawhi Leonard for half a second.
It was a good half second to turn into Kawhi Leonard, though.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think any way you look at it, you have to consider this to be a huge success as a season for OKC. And it leads to some very interesting questions. I think the first of which we agreed is, what do you do with Steven Adams?
Mm-hmm.
He's clearly a good player, but I think this series showed that there are going to be some teams that he is unplayable against.
Yeah, I mean, it really does go into why the traditional center is starting to go extinct. Houston was really vicious in exploiting his flaws. One of the biggest issues, I think, was that OKC isn't a team that runs in transition that often. So Houston didn't really feel intimidated by that threat, and they just bullied him and got tons of offensive rebounds. His one advantage is that he gets you rebounds. But when he's getting bullied by three guys, one of whom is PJ Tucker, that's not going to work out for you. Because they don't think that it's a big deal if they don't get the offensive rebound, you know? Like, they already have three guys back there. Like, who's gonna exploit that?
Yeah, and part of it too, I think, is that Houston is amazing at boxing out the right people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the OKC series, they told PJ Tucker not to grab rebounds and to just box out Steven Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that means that with Steven Adams out of the picture, other players can jump in and grab boards, right? Covington was an amazing rebounder that series for that specific reason. You know, he was basically given easy rebounds on a platter by PJ Tucker. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting, you know, he's making $27.5 million next year.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and it makes creating a trade very difficult. I think ultimately they're probably going to hold on to Steven Adams. He's a good culture piece. Apparently he's an awesome guy and all his teammates always love him. And he's a good player, you know, and in some series he's going to be a difference maker. You hope that he goes into the offseason with the mentality of trying to figure out how to exploit smaller matchups. Because if he can do that, then I think he's got a role in a series like the one against Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, OKC is lucky because if they do, for whatever reason, get desperate to get rid of him, they do have a lot of assets right now.
Yeah.
They have so much draft capital that it probably would not be hard to find a willing suitor for the last year of his expiring. I really don't think that it's going to be that much of a priority for them. But who knows? I mean, they could get maybe some kind of return for him.
Yeah, I think during the season, I was very intrigued by the Steven Adams to Atlanta idea because Atlanta was clearly in the market for a starting center. I think Atlanta lucked out and didn't get him. I'm very happy with Capella over Steven Adams. But yeah, you thought that Schroeder might be an interesting trade target too, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a $15.5 million contract next year, last year of his contract. So, you know, if OKC decides that they want to capitalize on his astronomical stock right now, I really would have picked him for Sixth Man of the Year over Harrell. But, you know, he's going to be a very intriguing piece for a lot of teams, especially ones that need... Like, I'm not sure if he could be the lead ball handler on a team, but he's definitely a starter quality player on certain teams, especially teams that are not at the level of competing for a championship yet. So I think that his contract is small enough and movable enough, and he is valuable enough that, you know, OKC could get more. I mean, I really don't know how many more draft picks they really need. They have, like, some ridiculous amount of first-round picks over the next few years. It's absurd. So... I don't know, maybe he could be packaged with some of those picks for something really nice.
Yeah, if I was OKC, that would be the only trade I'd be interested in. Upgrading your roster right now.
Yeah. I don't think Chris Paul is going to be traded before his contract's up. I just don't see his contract as being movable at all.
I mean, I just don't see why you'd want to trade him. He's been so good for them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Shai Gilgeous, as good as he's been this year, looked really outmatched in the series and clearly has a good bit of development to go, particularly in the decision-making realm, right? That last play was totally fumbled. I really think that anyone except for SGA should have been inbounding that ball. That's on Billy Donovan, but whatever. But having someone like Chris Paul mentoring him is going to bring back so much more return than whatever you're going to get for trading Chris Paul's like $45 million contract for whatever. I don't even know who has enough large contracts to give you something of value unless they're like albatrosses.
Yeah, I mean, OKC is lucky that they don't have to rely on their poor performance for draft picks. And I think you should, if you're a team that's rebuilding, you should use that to your advantage. Try to win now. Try to improve these younger players. Dort had an amazing series. He's clearly an asset that they want to keep on the team long term. I thought Darius Baisley actually showed a lot of promise in that Houston series.
Yeah.
And obviously, like you said, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's only going to get better. So I would not be hasty to tear this roster down.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the one area of need is role players that can shoot. Mm-hmm. The spacing in some of those situations when you have people like Terrence Ferguson and Hamidou Diallo out there, just really not ideal. And the fact that guys like Abdel Nader and Mike Muscala, who can shoot, are just not playable in the playoffs is problematic.
Yeah.
So they really just need to upgrade, I think, the wing rotations to get some better shooters in there, because they can't keep running ISO plays through Chris Paul and SGA forever and expect to get past the first round, even though they were so close.
Yeah, but you can make those moves without giving up much.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we're in agreement there. Make fringe roster moves. If it's not a lopsided trade, make that move if it makes your team better now.
And I don't know. I wonder if they will do a sign and trade with Gallinari.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to re-sign him. I don't think it makes sense based on anyone's timelines. But yeah, I mean, there's another place that they can get more assets. They really are in probably one of the best positions in terms of looking forward in the league.
For sure. Another team who I think we'd say is in a pretty good position is Utah. My big question with Utah after the Utah-Denver series is, would Bogdanović have made much of a difference in this series? Utah scored 120 points per 100 possessions on the series, but they only scored 78 points in Game 7, and it just seemed like they could have used a shot creator / shooter like Bogdanović in that game.
Yeah, I think Ingles had like one or two good games, but really struggled in terms of producing offense throughout the series. I think
producing points.
Yeah,
right. Because he's still going to get you some assists and keep the offense flowing. Like, he'll have games where he scores 2 points and is plus 20.
Yeah, that's true. And then I think Conley, they relied on some overperformance from Conley as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there were quite a few games where it was Donovan Mitchell carrying the team fairly considerably. So I think Bogdanović would have made somewhat of a difference. But I mean, the fact that Mitchell was averaging like high 30s per game on insane efficiency does make me wonder how much of a difference you can really make. Like, how much more efficient can your offense get? If you're just running it through Mitchell, who's absolutely supernova, like, that's one of the best offenses you can get. So, I mean, obviously having more options on the floor is always good, and they've clearly outperformed their expectations. I don't think anyone was expecting them to give Denver as much trouble as they did. And I will say, I thought it was really cool that these two teams, after these insane scoring performances night in, night out, they end with one of the, I think, probably one of the lowest scoring games of the season. Neither team had scored below 86 points in a game up until this point in the season.
Yeah.
So having it be 80 to 78 and be very watchable and enjoyable and entertaining, I mean, it really makes me think, should the NBA start evening the scales and bringing some focus back to defense? Because that was so much more enjoyable to watch than some of these like shootouts where dudes are just getting fouled constantly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if I'd agree with that, because I feel like the shootouts that don't have fouls are the best games.
That's true.
Like some of the earlier games in this series were amazing. You know, when Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell are just trading points back and forth in the fourth quarter. But it was pretty fun to see a throwback to 2001, 78 to 80 game, you know. Yeah. Let's move along, though, to Dallas.
Fuck Marcus Morris. Can we just get that out of the way? What the hell, man? What is that? What was that with that attitude, the trying to injure young superstar? Like, man, come on. Grow up.
I just couldn't believe he didn't get suspended for the stepping on the shoe stuff.
Yeah, I know. I guess reasonable doubt is a bitch.
It harkens back to the days when J.R. Smith was untying people's shoes. But that was at least funny.
Yeah. This
isn't even funny.
Not funny at all. And then smacking Luka across the face for no reason and just like staring him down. Like, dude, it's just ridiculous. You know, you're not intimidating anyone. You're just pissing them off.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So fuck Marcus Morris. Now, in terms of Dallas, I think the future's looking strong, obviously. Luka and KP both looked, pretty good. Like, you cut Kristaps Porzingis a little slack because he was dealing with nagging injuries, and he got the bogus ejection in, what was that, game 1?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was bullshit. Also, fuck Marcus Morris for that.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that Dallas has to work on is twofold. A, they need to get a secondary ball handler to help Luka and Kristaps. Obviously, Luka is going to be a high usage player for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
That's just what he's going to do. He's an amazing ball handler and transcendent passer. But he had a 42% usage in the playoffs, according to Cleaning the Glass. And that's just really high.
Yeah, just for some perspective, I think Donovan Mitchell was at like 38%.
Yeah.
When cleaning the glass. So, a 4% increase, that's ridiculous.
So one of the things I was thinking about is, could you nab a player like Karis LeVert, who doesn't work perfectly on the Nets, right? Because they already have 2 primary ball handlers, and that's what Karis LeVert projects as. But Karis LeVert on the Mavericks, playing a secondary ball handling role, maybe even as a holdover starter on the bench mobs, I think would make a lot of sense. And LeVert is around the same age as KP and Luka. He's 25. That's a little bit older than KP. But he's making $16 million a year. So it makes creating a trade package to attain him very easy. One of the trade packages I was looking at was Kleber, Delon Wright, and a first-round pick.
Yeah, I looked at that and I was like, they're going to want Seth Curry instead of Delon Wright.
Yeah. Seth Curry makes about the same money as Wright,
they pretty much just have a bunch of guys on like $8 to $10 million a year contracts.
Yeah, okay. You just package 2 of those guys together, and I think you can get Karis.
Yeah, I think another reason that Karis LeVert would be a good addition is I was looking at the above the break 3-point percentage in this series, and Dallas just struggled so badly. Part of it is that they're always going to prioritize the pass out to a corner 3 move because it's just really efficient.
Yeah.
But Luka takes a lot of pull-up threes above the break that don't go in, and Karis LeVert is much better at that and a very dynamic scorer off the dribble. So I think he would help them quite a bit in that situation. And including, there's so many scenarios that we saw this year where Dallas blows up a commanding lead that they had at the beginning of the 4th, and then Luka puts up a last-second 3-pointer off the dribble to try, like a step back or something to try to win the game, and it doesn't go in. I think LeVert could, maybe help out with that.
Yeah, and LeVert's one of those strange inverted players where his off the dribble 3-point percentage is higher than his catch and shoot 3-point percentage. So I think that sort of speaks to your point about him maybe being able to create a Luka style offense while Luka isn't on the court. He's also an underrated passer. I don't think the assists or the assist percentage really put into perspective how good he is at passing. And look, he's just going to be on the trade block. That's just going to happen because he isn't a natural fit with the other Nets stars. So that's interesting.
The other area of improvement, I think, would be to get a enforcer, a bruiser type player, a gritty vet that can play...
A gritty MILF.
A gritty MILF, that's right, that's the word we use. A gritty MILF that can defend players on the wing. We really saw the issue with the Clippers series where Kawhi matched up with Dorian Finney-Smith and Maxi Kleber, and as much as they tried to slow him down, and I think Finney-Smith did a pretty good job, it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And obviously Dallas, when you have such a good offense, the defense is going to have to give. So I think having a guy like that would be very helpful. Perhaps a Marcus Morris type.
Yeah, that's awesome. But look, Kawhi shot 50% against Kleber, and Kleber was the primary defender against Kawhi. That's just unacceptable. And I think if you're an aspiring team in the West, you just have to have more than one good wing defender. So I was looking into this. Dallas is in position to get their mid-level exception, which for teams that are below the luxury tax and above the salary cap it can be a pretty big contract. Last year it was $9,250,000, which is a lot, right? Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see what the MLE is this year because we just have no idea. The salary cap is surely going to drop, but is it going to drop by 20%? Is it going to drop by 50%? Who freaking knows? Anyways, there are a few players that sort of fit that mold that are going to be free agents and could be attained at that number, I think. I was looking hard at Maurice Harkless, Jay Crowder, and this might be a bit of a stretch. I think he's probably going to make more than the MLE, but Jeremy Grant. Mm-hmm. Any of those players, I think, would help out tremendously. I would refrain from trading assets down the road to get one of these players, one of these elite defensive wings, because I think they're going to need those first-round picks to trade for a better player if that person is available.
Yeah, definitely. If they can add a guy and make a big three, that would be incredible. I mean, that team, how would you stop that?
Yeah, but the only way you're doing that is if you keep your first-round picks and don't use them for fringe acquisitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any of the guys that you named would be worthy of that.
Yeah, or anyone else that's like in that ballpark but plays for a team.
Yeah.
Or is under contract for a team.
Yeah, I do feel like in free agency they'll be able to nab someone in that mold, even if it's not one of those three guys, but we'll see.
All right, we're going to do a rapid fire for the shittier teams.
All right, Nets, let's go. They hired Steve Nash. That's going to be interesting.
I mean, it's hard to speculate on what his coaching style will be. I think you can assume it's going to be similar to D'Antoni, who was a very transformative coach for him.
Yeah, I think that one of the bigger questions in terms of how the roster can look like, because I think with Steve Nash, it's just pure speculation. I think with the roster, we can make some guesses. We were talking about LeVert moving. It could either be him, it could be Dinwiddie. I think one will probably have to stay as the backup point guard. So we'll see who that will be. Probably Dinwiddie.
As the person that stays?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think LeVert can get them a lot more return. The other thing is, do they keep any of the G League squad that they brought to the bubble? I think Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot actually looked like a pretty solid rotation piece.
Well, he was there before the bubble, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I just don't know if he has a guaranteed income for next year yet.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah. And then Tyler Johnson is actually a bona fide NBA player, or was. So I could see him getting thrown a vet minimum. But other than that, I don't think that any of those guys are going to be on the roster next year.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that they would give Michael Beasley a contract, even though he didn't play for them. Yeah. Just because of the laws. But I think that is going to be only hope and nothing more.
Yeah. Maybe Jamal Crawford. Who knows?
All right. Orlando. It's funny how, they seem like they're out of their rebuild, but they're still winning less than 40 games and making the 8th seed in the East. Is that really the end of a rebuild?
Definitely not. They actually did, I think, admirably against the Bucks. They won game 1, obviously, but there were a few moments in some of the other games that they were keeping it close into the fourth quarter. I think they got to within 3 points in game 5 before just their offense cooled down because they're not a good offensive team. Problem is, the Isaac injury is devastating. Mm-hmm. It's another year that they don't have a guy that could be one of their big cornerstone pieces. And the rest of the roster isn't really that inspiring, although what Steve Clifford has done with them is very impressive to just get that team into the playoffs for the last 2 years, despite what they have to work with. I think deserves some credit, even if it's hard to watch.
I'll tell you what the Isaac injury is good for is bringing down that extension they're going to offer him.
That's true.
There's a scenario in which Isaac's extension is Steph Curry-esque in terms of undervalue for performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could totally see that. And I think some of the other roster points, so they have the 15th pick in this year's draft. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see whether they use that to draft a player or whether they'll pack that with some of their more tradable contracts for something else. I'd probably see them drafting someone.
Yeah, and it's also incredible that this team is drafted in the lottery so many different years and somehow just doesn't have any players that can dribble.
Yeah.
Other than Markelle Fultz, who
Fultz is developing well.
His issues are very well documented. I find that very strange. DJ Augustine is surprisingly a must keep during the off season. They've got to re-sign that guy.
Yeah, he's pretty washed. I don't know if there is another guy that's going to be on the market that will be able to replace him, he's definitely not an ideal person to be having in that position. But
Yeah.
if it's like a bench guard, could be a lot worse. Yeah, and then I think there's like a couple investments that they could make. I think there's going to be a lot of decent cheap shooters out on the market, which will probably do a lot for their spacing and their offense. I don't know, without naming names, just like all the dudes that are on Pistons and the Knicks that are going to be coming off their contracts this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So they could find a beautiful tropical home in Orlando this next season. But
No income tax.
No income tax is huge. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's comes down to whether Fournier takes his player option and whether they want to trade him, which I think they should. And really the big question mark is whether they trade Vucevic.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ideally you'd want to break down the roster and get some future pieces, because I just don't see any scenario in which this roster improves through free agency. But that's a hard pill to swallow if you're a team that, was rebuilding for 8 years before they made the playoffs last season.
Yep.
So.
And AG is probably a good trade candidate as well, just so we don't forget about him.
Yeah, he makes no sense on the team.
No. All right. Another team with huge roster woes, Philadelphia.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about Brett Brown being gone because we already did that in our last episode. Check that out if you want to hear more. I think with Philly, it's just more of the same. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this team because it's just so well documented. The weird fit between Simmons and Embiid is something you have to take a hard look at in the offseason. Obviously, Horford and Tobias Harris, I think, are going to be good trade candidates. It'll be interesting to see if they get offers for those players, considering Horford played with a great deal of inconsistency. I think defenders of Horford would say it's all because of the fit next to Embiid, and he was a plus for the season without Embiid. But the counting stat decreases for Horford this year I think are really troublesome. And then Harris is just on such a large contract. He had a pretty good year this year, but it's just very difficult. Yeah, it's hard to create a trade.
Yeah, definitely. But we'll see what happens, whether they reupholster the team. But moving on, Portland, very lucky that Lillard just had a knee strain or sprain or whatever, and CJ can finally rest his back, which was broken throughout the entire bubble, if you were not aware. I think that they're going to look a lot better next year in the regular season now that they have Nurkic back and playing minutes. The Whiteside fit was always horrible, but it was a necessary evil. I'm interested to see if they stick with Carmelo Anthony as long as he has gas in the tank. Which, who knows how much gas he has left in the tank.
Yeah, I think Melo played his way into another minimum deal.
Yeah, at least that.
I'd bring him back.
Yeah, for sure.
Wouldn't give him much more than that, but yeah, I think the big issue with Portland is trying to figure out how to fix the defensive woes. In the Lakers series, scoring wasn't an issue. Mm-hmm. It was keeping the Lakers from scoring.
Yeah, not having Ariza kind of makes it a difficult question because who knows how much better they would have been with Ariza. I don't think Ariza by himself would have saved him that much.
Man, I totally forgot he was on the team.
Yeah.
And that's funny because in the first few episodes, he's like all we talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think re-signing him, does he have an expiring contract? Well, either way, keeping Ariza would be not the worst thing for them to do. I don't know if I would look into getting like a solid defensive guard. I think Chris Dunn will be on the market soon. And I think that they really need to shore that up as well. You can't just have Dame Lillard and CJ and then Anthony Simons at all the guard minutes. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, Chris Dunn's interesting in the regard of if you can bring him off the bench to play next to Dame/CJ, I think that makes a lot of sense for the defense. Especially if Dunn can just develop into a solid corner 3 shooter. Mm-hmm. That would be huge.
And Gary Trent, to his credit, has been pretty good at filling that role for the time being. Obviously, he's not going to be a amazing world-class defender, but I think that what he was able to do in the first couple games against LeBron was surprising, to say the least. So, Portland, interesting outlook. We'll see what happens. At least they're lucky that they have someone as marketable as Dame Lillard leading the ship. So you can always want to root for Portland no matter how well or poorly they're playing. Except for when the Bubble Suns win 8 in a row and don't make it into the playoffs. Then you root against Portland.
Yeah, of course. And then last, and also least, the Indiana Pacers. I mean, I guess you got to just talk about Oladipo trades. There's so much buzz. It's so weird, though, because all of the buzz is in the background.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the LeBron buzz about the Lakers in the early stages of the season before he left the Cavaliers. I just remember a bunch of really plugged in, informed journalists were talking about him leaving for LA. And there was, no talk from teammates, no talk from coaches, no talk from LeBron himself, who is pretty vocal, but also good about being vocal without giving away any actual information. I don't know. It's a weird situation. You thought Oladipo was perfect for the Pacers, being a University of Indiana guy and being sort of this guy that's so loyal. He clearly respected the team for valuing him in the Paul George trade.
Right.
It's just very strange.
Yeah, I don't know if I see him getting traded unless he desperately makes a turnaround from how he's looked playing basketball for the last however many months. His performance in the bubble, he's got flashes, but just hasn't been that consistent. I just don't think that his stock is very valuable right now. I think that the risk is higher that you trade him away and then another team who lowballed you profits. I think that risk is much higher than getting a good trade for him. I don't think it's worth getting rid of him before you kind of get a better idea of where he is physically.
Can I give you my favorite Oladipo trade?
What's that?
Milwaukee for Bledsoe and 2 or 3 first rounders.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
the contracts make sense, I think. I think Bledsoe's maybe a little bit lower, like $18 million.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if Milwaukee loses this series and decides to make an all-in move to keep Giannis.
Mm-hmm.
That makes just a ton of sense in terms of you picked up a star guard. This guy's also in the same general age bracket as Giannis and sort of Middleton too. Middleton's a little older than them, but...
Yeah, I don't think that's the worst trade in the world. I mean, like I was saying, it just remains to be seen whether Oladipo can come back even close to the level that he was playing at before his injury. It would be a very big risk for Milwaukee to do it sight unseen. Then it's a big risk for Indiana, too, to trade Oladipo, who might come back and be amazing, for Bledsoe, who, Bledsoe's gotten enough trash talking. We don't have to harp on him anymore.
Right, and the injury makes his valuation for trades very difficult.
Yeah.
If the injury is going to be a long-term concern, then it's going to be very hard to get, I think, 2 first-rounders for a guy like that. And obviously teams, when trading for Oladipo, are going to be very diligent about their medical backgrounding on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just to talk about some of the other roster questions, I think it'll be interesting to see Sabonis and how he's integrated into a system, especially if someone like D'Antoni gets the job, which, we'll see how Houston does in this series and if he gets an extension. But, Sabonis, as good as he is, I think he might have some trouble fitting into a really modern offensive system.
Mm-hmm.
And, we'll see. He's a very good player, and I think that they should hold on to him as long as possible because I think his contract is a pretty good value as well. So, yeah, that, and the only other thing I would say is that they have so many good pieces that I could see them packaging some stuff together to get, another solid starting guy. But I haven't thought enough about who that would be.
Yeah, I mean, they're an interesting team in the sense of they can go in a bunch of different directions. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the offseason with Indiana and all of these teams. And it'll be also fun to not think about them for 2 months.
Yeah, or however long it takes. So
I'm just throwing so much shade at these teams on this spot. Sorry, Indiana fans. Sorry, Portland fans. Sorry, everyone. Yeah.
We will repent for our sins.
Okay, I think that's it for this episode. As always, check us out on Twitter at AwayTeamPod. We've been throwing out some good content there. And we've got a really cool Reddit chart idea that Dimitri's been working on that will hopefully go up soon. We'll post that out on Twitter when it does. And anything else?
No, that's it. To all those whose teams are still in the running, best of luck.
And to all those whose teams are gone, RIP.
What?
All right, Away Team out.